My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life. Welcome to the Duck Milk Prod YouTube channel. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and this live stream is part of a series I am calling Reading Reviews with Rebecca, which will analyze the critical reception of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice through the lens of 38 of the negative reviews written by top critics from Rotten Tomatoes, one review at a time. This is not meant to belittle anyone's opinions, but rather serve as a study of art criticism and how we discuss film. And I'm hoping that perhaps this endeavor will encourage us all to be better consumers of cinema. Today, I'll be reading through a review from NPR titled Batman v Superman: Superheroes Adrift in a Grim Sea of Studio Money, written by Chris Klimek or Klimek. I'm sorry if I don't know how to pronounce that correctly. My apologies in advance, Chris. The link to this review is in the video description, so if you're watching this and you want to follow along, I encourage you to click on it and read it for yourself. If Chris should ever see this video, I just want to say that I'm aiming to do this as civilly and analytically as possible, and I would ask that anyone watching live or posting in the comments would do the same. I'm simply taking a look at the criticism for and of BVS now from an historical point of view, given that these reviews were used by Warner Brothers in their decision-making process regarding the DC Extended Universe. Due to the poor reviews for Batman v Superman, the tone and approach to the franchise were changed for Justice League and ultimately led to the destruction of the Snyderverse. And before I get into Chris's thoughts, I'm sure there are some viewers out there who might think, Chris is a film critic for a major news outlet. Who cares what you have to say, Rebecca? And I totally understand. I would probably ask the same question. So just going to take a few minutes and give you some background on me. I graduated from the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, with a degree in telecommunications and film and a focus on broadcast television production. While I've never been to film school, in my television and production experience, I've learned about and have lots of practice in operating cameras, shot composition, and editing. Lighting, green screen, and audio are my weak spots, admittedly, but I've been working on those. After working in local TV news, running cameras, and working in production, I got a job at Turner, now Warner Media, or whatever they're calling themselves now, for 14 years. I worked with networks, or brands as they call them now, like TBS, TNT, Adult Swim, Cartoon Network, Boomerang, True TV, and Turner Classic Movies as a video encoding specialist. I also did a fair amount of closed captioning work and DVD and Blu-ray QC. In case you are wondering how I podcasted about Supergirl and the DCEU films while working for a Time Warner company, I actually got permission and clearance from my human resources representative. If you think I wouldn't criticize stories that were under the same corporate umbrella, that was never a problem nor a concern for me. If I thought the Supergirl TV series or a DCEU film had faults, I said so. In the last 17 years, I have served as a director, technical director, and camera operator at my local church in a live production capacity. I've been a video editor for 17 years, having worked in Avid, Final Cut, and Premiere Pro CC. In my day job, I shoot and edit news and documentary-style video content that involves interviews and narrative storytelling. I'm also currently an amateur photographer and am aiming to improve my efforts in still photography. You can check out my work over at Instagram at @TheDerbyKid. Link is in the video description below. While discussing these film reviews, music and film scores will inevitably come up. It may be good to know that in my life, I have played piano, handbells, clarinet, bass clarinet, bassoon, acoustic guitar, and have even started learning how to play the ukulele. I've played in marching bands, symphonic bands, and wind ensembles, and have sung in many choirs. While I don't consider myself a world-class musician, far from it, actually, I do know some things about music and am a big fan of film scores and soundtracks. In addition to my production and musical experience, I have had lots of experience in art criticism. I've been podcasting about television and film since 2009 and do so on a regular basis with Supergirl Radio, a podcast I co-host about the CW Supergirl TV series. I am also a writing contributor to the Justice League Universe podcast that offers analysis on the DCEU films. You might even hear my voice occasionally in recordings and audio commentaries over there. I'm not an expert, but I care deeply about film, television, storytelling, and art. So I hope this gives you a background on where I'm coming from. All right, now that we've gotten that out of the way, let's get into Chris from NPR's review of Batman v Superman. So I usually like to start with the headline or the title of the piece, which he or his editor, who knows who actually wrote this, titled it "Batman v Superman: Superheroes Adrift in a Grim Sea of Studio Money." In my personal opinion, I can tell right away that this is not going to be a serious review of the film because it's concentrating on external factors that have nothing to do with the storytelling, the filmmaking, or anything to do with the actual film of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice itself. It's concentrating on the studio and everything to do with Warner Brothers. So that to me is not a great start because if I'm a film fan and I want to read a review, I don't want to read a review about all the things outside of the film. I want to dig in deep into the actual material, the actual content of the film, the actual story of the film. So to me, that's disappointing reading a review title that starts off that way because it kind of sets the tone for what we're about to get into. So Chris starts, quote, "Comic books from several discrete decades get mashed up in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, while swaths of real estate, uninhabited swaths, were repeatedly assured, just get pulped," unquote. No. Film critics do not get to do this after they complained endlessly about it in Man of Steel, about the destruction and the fighting that went on during the Battle of Metropolis when Superman fought Zod. There was endless whining. There is still complaints about that today, many years later. And film critics were the people at the front of this when Man of Steel came out. So anybody who's writing about it during Batman v Superman, any film critic to me does not get the ability. I will not grant you the ability to complain about that, to complain about the fact that Batman v Superman corrected that for critics. Critics whined about it in Man of Steel, and then the filmmaking team decided, the writer Zack Snyder decided that they would make sure that that was not an issue in Batman v Superman, and film critics still complained about it. So that's such a bad way to start a review of a film, and it makes me kind of irritated as a fan of both of these films. So it's a strange way to start, just negative right out of the gate. So I don't think personally, in my opinion, that when the approach to destruction is changed because you complained about it, you don't get the chance to be sassy and complain about it when it gets corrected. You should be grateful as a film critic that someone actually listened to your thoughts and actually did something that they thought would make you happy. All right, so I'm going to continue on into the review. So he continues on to say, quote, "But no text is quoted more directly than The Dark Knight Returns. Frank Miller's influential 1986 tale of an over-the-hill Batman coming out of retirement to clean up a Gotham gone to hell. It was the greatest Batman story ever told, and it had the unforeseen side effect of draining every particle of sunlight out of superhero stories for years to come. But it hit far beyond the normal comics readership, foretelling our current era of superheroes as mainstream entertainment for grown-ups, and it helped publisher DC Comics briefly eclipse its chief rival, Marvel. I appreciate the history lesson here. I can sense some bitterness in it for sure. But this does provide the reader with some value about the historical context of the film and some of the stories that BBS is trying to adapt and use for its story. Though I wouldn't say that The Dark Knight Returns, quote, drained every particle of sunlight out of superhero stories for years to come, unquote. I would argue that it simply just took Batman seriously, and a lot of storytellers and fans were drawn to that and inspired by that. So it's again, this is kind of a conflicting paragraph here, because it does give the reader some value, but it is really coming at it from a place of bitterness and negativity, and again, really doesn't have anything to do with the actual substance of the film. All right, Chris continues on to say, quote, I bore you with this history. I bore you with this history because a generation later, DC, the home of Superman and Wonder Woman and the Elongated Man and Matter Eater Lad, is chasing Marvel once again, unquote. I appreciate the use of the comic book characters here, and, pulling Matter Eater Lad out from the Legion of Superheroes is pretty great. I actually enjoy Matter Eater Lad. It's a ridiculous concept for a character that he actually eats matter, and that's kind of his superpower. But if you're going to write this, wouldn't it make more sense to do it in terms of threes? Why would you do Superman, Wonder Woman, Elongated Man, and Matter Eater Lad? It would make more sense to me, because most of the time when you're grouping things like this, you would do it in a group of three. So I would probably say Superman and Wonder Woman and Matter Eater Lad. I think that has a bigger sort of punch to it, because if you're just drowning on and on and on with your lists, it gets a little tedious. But I appreciate the pulls of Elongated Man, who has become popularized through the Flash TV show, and Matter Eater Lad, who's a great Legionnaire. You should read Legion of Superhero comics; they're fantastic. I'm not not the biggest Legion fan in the world, but I have read some Legion comics, and I do enjoy Matter Eater Lad for sure. It is strange, though, in this little section that Chris says, "I bore you." Because I thought in the previous paragraph, with the mention of The Dark Knight Returns and all the history that went along with that this person, this Chris reviewer, he seemed to have a lot of knowledge of the comic books, and it seemed like that would be maybe something that he was interested in, or had some sort of interest and love for. But here he says, "I bore you," so it seems like maybe he's not interested in comics. So I'm kind of trying to find where his personality is, but it's I'm a little conflicted here. So it's strange to me. But that is the paragraph that tries to continue to emphasize the comics here. Again, still not really having anything to do with the context of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice as a film. And in terms of DC films chasing Marvel, I guess you could make that argument. I mean, in the history of where this is, Marvel had made a lot of films, had a lot of huge success, and DC as a series of films was trying to get a universe up off the ground. But just because DC put multiple DC characters in a film together doesn't mean they're chasing Marvel. Marvel shouldn't be the only franchise and studio that has ever done this. And that's a weird argument to make, in my opinion, because DC should have the opportunity to create its own film universe and incorporate as many characters as it wants to. So I guess you could make that argument that they were chasing Marvel, but at the same time, it's like, do you not want them to do this? Do you not want them to have multiple films and create a film universe and use as many characters as they can? I mean, I would. I'm a DC fan. I would love to see that. So while I guess you could make that argument, I don't see it that way. Chris goes on to say, quote, DC was first to box office success by decades, scoring massive hits with Richard Donner's Superman in 1978 and Tim Burton's Batman in 1989. But the interconnected fictive universe wherein different heroes' stories overlap endlessly, question mark, unquote. That's a weird sentencing structure here. So I don't know why that ends on a question mark. An editor could have stepped in for this section. I think maybe this could have been written maybe a little stronger and a little tighter. I guess he had to use the words, quote, overlap endlessly, because technically DC was the first interconnected universe wherein different heroes' stories overlapped, because Supergirl the movie exists, and it included a picture of Christopher Reeve's Superman in there. It made mention that Kara's cousin was the Man of Steel, and it featured Mark McClure's Jimmy Olsen, who also appeared in the Christopher Reeve's Superman film. So the Christopher Reeve's Superman films is George Reeves and Christopher Reeves. So I'm trying to say it with the apostrophe S, and then it seems like it's multiple Reeves. So I hope that translated well. But yeah, so I would make the argument that Supergirl the movie was actually the first interconnected universe. Even if it was just two films, it's still connected to different characters in the same universe. So I would argue that DC got there first in 1984, by the way. All right. So Chris goes on to say, quote, only Marvel has brought that to the movies, and only it stopped after licensing out its most popular characters, Spider-Man, the ever-shifting lineup of X-Men, and got into the biz itself. 2008's Iron Man was the test balloon. Now Marvel has a movie about the Inhumans on the way, a group of heroes, I'm guessing, that even a lapsed comic book nerd like me couldn't pick out of my official handbook of the Marvel Universe if the entries weren't alphabetized, unquote. Okay, two questions here in this section. Why has this review become an editorial about the MCU? This whole thing is about the MCU. It has nothing to do with Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice as a film. There's nothing in here where it reviews BVS and the story and the substance of the film. It is solely about the MCU here. And so I don't understand what this has to do with anything about critiquing BVS as a film. This is not an MCU review. This is a review about Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice, just in case Chris forgot, because it sort of seemed like he's getting a little lost in what he's supposed to do here. And so to go back, let's see, I guess he mentions the Inhumans, and then he goes on to say, quote, knowing exactly nothing about it, I have to figure the Inhumans will be more fun to sit through than Batman v Superman, unquote. Oh man, I wish I could get an update on Chris's thoughts on the Inhumans, which went from being, and we have the advantage of, I guess, hindsight is 2020, that we know now in 2021 that the Inhumans went from being an MCU movie to a TV series that only ran for 8 episodes. Now, to be fair and honest, I didn't watch it, so I can't speak to the quality of it. But considering it dropped 2 million viewers from episode 1 to episode 8 and then ended its run there, I'm guessing that a large group of people didn't find it all that fun to sit through. But I sure wish I could get an update on Chris's thoughts about the Inhumans. Okay, so to continue on and sort of to further his thought here, Chris writes, quote, knowing exactly nothing about it, I have to figure the Inhumans will be more fun to sit through than Batman v Superman, from Zack Snyder, the same guy who brought DC's other influential 1986 comic book to the screen in Watchmen. That film was R-rated and long and grim and dark and violent, averaging roughly 1 joke per 40 minutes. But it looks like Pee-wee's Big Adventure next to BVS, a ponderous, smothering, over-pixelated Zeppelin crash of a movie scored by a choir that sounds like it's being drowned in lava, unquote. Oh, man, there's a lot to get into this paragraph. Okay, so in my opinion, the first sentence in this paragraph needs a good editor. It seems like, to me, it's a run-on sentence that needs to be rearranged a little bit to make more sense and to be more readable. I feel like this was maybe a first draft of this review and somebody just turned it in. Nobody looked at it, because I think maybe you could tighten this up and make these things a little bit more readable. I have a couple questions. Why would you mention Watchmen being grim and dark and violent and critiquing it for having little humor when the book it's adapting is just like that? The Watchmen film by Zack Snyder actually, in my opinion, captures the essence of the Watchmen book so well. And I think that I don't think you can criticize a film for being what the book it adapts, like it's matching the tone of the book that it's adapting. So I don't understand how you can critique it for that. And then in this paragraph, it actually goes into like a little bit of a review of Watchmen, the Watchmen film. It says it's R-rated, gives it a couple of descriptive words: grim, dark, violent, and then critiques it for not having a lot of jokes. Can you imagine a Watchmen film knowing that story for being like jokes every 5 minutes? I can't wrap my mind around that, because it would take all the seriousness out of that story away. There's a lot of very adult things that happen in that book, and I think Zack Snyder really hit it on the nose with the tone. And so I don't understand why would you desperately need Watchmen to have jokes, a lot of jokes. I don't understand that. I mean, you do have a character called the Comedian, but he's not really a comedian that tells a lot of jokes, even in the book. So I find that a strange thing to include here in this paragraph. Then something that really confuses me here in this paragraph, he mentions Pee-wee's Big Adventure here, and I just want to point out that just for me personally, I'm a huge Pee-wee's Big Adventure fan. It's probably, if I had to list out my top 5 favorite films of all time, Pee-wee's Big Adventure would be in the top 5. It sort of goes back and forth what other films are in there. Sometimes, depending on it, on the year and what happens, it might change. But Pee-wee's Big Adventure is always going to be in that top 5. Maybe not, the top 5 best films of all time, but top 5, me personally, favorite of all time, which could be a little bit of a different list. But Pee-wee's Big Adventure, I've loved since I was a kid. I still love it. I recently bought a bike last year, and I made sure to get it red. And my goal is to make it look like Pee-wee's bike from Pee-wee's Big Adventure. I'm still in the process, but I want to get some white tires and maybe some, red rims that go around it. So I don't know if I'll put streamers. That may be a little too much on the handles. But but that was my goal when I decided I was going to get a bike. I said I'm going to make it look like Pee-wee's Big Adventure bike as closely as I can, because I love that bike so much. And I couldn't wear this on the live stream because of my green screen. It was sort of freaking out over it. But I do have this Pee-wee's Big Adventure shirt that I love. So that's the bike that I'm trying to to actually make a reality in my own garage. So I'm a huge fan of Pee-wee's Big Adventure. I love quoting the scene from the Alamo where, Jan Hooks is like, "Do we have any Mexican Americans with us today? Well, buenos dias." It's something that I quote all the time with my brother. So it's a film that I love, dear and near to my heart. But I'm confused as to why it is mentioned here. I guess he's trying to say that because Watchmen is bleak, but BVS is bleaker, Watchmen looks like Pee-wee's Big Adventure in comparison to BVS. That's what he's trying to say. And he's saying that Pee-wee's Big Adventure is, it's a quirky, fun little film that has a lot of goofy things that happen. There's a lot of fun comedic moments in it that, Pee-wee is a lovable character. He's got a lot of fun things that happen to him. He's got a lot of characters that are really interesting that he, runs into during his adventure. And so there's a lot of happy, funny things that you can laugh at in that film. But what I think is really funny in this comparison that he's made, that I don't even think is a very good one, but he seems to also neglect to tell the reader that Pee-wee's Big Adventure is, it's a Tim Burton film, so it's going to have a little weird stuff in it. Tim Burton is one of my favorite film directors of all time. I love Tim Burton films, but he doesn't mention that there are things like the Large Marge sequence and there's also a sequence that I was going to just kind of play and talk through here, just because Pee-wee's Big Adventure is not quite the lovable thing all the way through. There's a lot of scary bits in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. There's scary clowns. Pee-wee's having this nightmare about his bike being, destroyed. And he goes with these clowns basically into hell, where Francis is the devil. Francis is the guy who's stolen his bike. And this is a whole sequence where these clowns, which are scary to a lot of people. There's a lot of people have a clown phobia. I might actually have a little bit of a clown phobia. I don't really want to have anything to do with clowns. But this is Pee-wee's Big Adventure. I just want to, mention that to people in case they are confused by the comparison, because I am too, because Pee-wee's Big Adventure also has this sequence in it. So I don't really understand what Chris's point is here with the Pee-wee's Big Adventure mention, because there's just as much as it is lovable, and there's a lot of funny things that happen in Pee-wee's Big Adventure. Pee-wee's kind of an innocent character who, he's a good friend, and he goes around and meets all these cool people. But there's also some really scary bits in there. Tim Burton really uses demented clowns to great effect. It scared me as a child, and it still kind of scares me a little bit. There's a scene that I'm not gonna play out here, but there's also a scene with a clown where Pee-wee realizes that his bike has been stolen. And there's a scary clown there right where his bike was. Ooh, those clowns in that film. Ooh, I love it, but it is a little scary. So I guess I'm just really confused as to why Chris mentioned Pee-wee's Big Adventure here. Why not mention like another like goofy comedy instead of Pee-wee's Big Adventure? Pee-wee's Big Adventure has a lot of different genres in it, and it has a lot of different tones to it. So it's not 100% lighthearted and good times. There's some scary stuff in it. Okay, so I'm going to go on with Chris's review. He says, quote, "This is what happens when you give a bad director $250 million or so while doing all you possibly can to make sure every creative decision he makes is motivated by sheer panic. Catch Marvel." I guess I should make that more exclamation point. Catch Marvel! Set up the next 10 movies. He uses a lot of exclamation points here. And he continues on saying, "BVS has no room to breathe, even at 151 minutes, 30 or 40 of which offer no, okay, I'm goofing up his sentence here. There's a lot of numbers. He says, BVS has no room to breathe, even at 151 minutes, 30 or 40 of which offer actual pleasure," unquote. I have a lot of questions about this section. Why is Zack Snyder a bad director? Nowhere in this piece does the critic establish this, explain that, go into any depth. He just assumes that you, the reader, and me, the reader, agree with him. So I really wish I could get an explanation of why Zack Snyder is a bad director. Tell me why you think that. I would be interested in knowing. I also have a question about why does BVS have to catch Marvel just because it has multiple DC characters in this film? I still don't understand that critique. Just because Marvel has done it doesn't mean that DC and Warner Brothers couldn't do it too. It's the same kind of universe. That's like saying that they only can have one DC character in each film. Look, what? Who made that rule? Did Chris make that rule? I don't understand this. So he also though, if I granted Chris's premise that WB and DC were trying to play catch Marvel, why does this critic assume that the catch Marvel motivation was Zack Snyder's idea? I guess, hindsight is 2020, but we all know that the bad decisions really that came out of the DCU at this time, that can be laid straight at the foot of the WB executives. That has nothing to do with Zack Snyder and the decisions that he made. It was actually Zack Snyder who wanted to do something different from the MCU and had a complete vision for the universe. So maybe Chris, he didn't know this kind of stuff at the time. Maybe he just assumed that all these bad decisions were Zack Snyder's. But we all kind of know history has shown us that a lot of these decisions that became negative for the DCEU were decisions that Warner Brothers made that Zack Snyder couldn't control. So I guess we have the advantage now in the year 2021 to know that history, and maybe Chris didn't know that, but also why would Chris assume this? So that's I guess I would never write or talk about something that way in which I assumed something about a creator. Also, again, I just want to remind everybody how we're 30 minutes into this reading of the review, and he still has really not dug into the actual substance of the film. So this is really not a review of the film as much as it is a review of the situation around the film, I would argue anyway. Okay, and so also, does Chris complain about setting up the next 10 movies with the MCU? That's a question I have. Maybe he'll address it later on, or does he just have this complaint when it's a film directed by Zack Snyder? I think that's a fair question. I'd be curious to know the answer. Chris also says that 30 or 40 minutes in BVS offer no actual pleasure to him, but he doesn't explain which parts. Which parts don't actually offer you any pleasure when you watch it, and why? Why are they not pleasurable to you? None of that is mentioned in this film review. Okay, so Chris goes on to write, quote, "Here's the good 23%. Ben Affleck and Jeremy Irons have a nice rapport as Batman and butler / co-conspirator Alfred Pennyworth, now 20 years and one dead sidekick, into the Batman's campaign of broken kneecaps policing." And he puts this in parentheses. "The bat signal atop police headquarters suggests detente in law enforcement vigilante relations, but a Gotham cop still shoots at Batman for some reason," in parentheses, unquote. All right. Well, you know what? Even though there's not a lot of actual discussion of the film here, I'm actually impressed that this critic took the time to calculate percentages for this review. He did some math. I can't even hate it. I'm just impressed. I appreciate also that Chris seems somewhat objective in this section, saying that he thought Ben Affleck and Jeremy Irons performed well as Bruce and Alfred. I appreciate, it seems like he didn't like a lot of the film, but he's able to point out the things that he thought were good about it. So I appreciate that objectivity here. But I also want to know, did Chris not pay attention to the story in BVS? I'm guessing the bat branding has something to do with the cops shooting at Batman for some reason. That's definitely something that's mentioned in the newspaper right after it happens. So there is something to be said about, that there's always, even in most Batman stories, whether it be comic books or TV shows or films, a lot of the time, even though Commissioner Gordon or whatever his in that story, whatever his title is, sometimes he hasn't gotten to be commissioner yet, but even Gordon sometimes, I should say, even if he is friendly with Batman, maybe the other cops aren't. Maybe the other people in law enforcement aren't. Maybe the politicians in Gotham City aren't. So you can't just assume that just because Jim Gordon is willing to work with Batman, that not everybody at the GCPD is. So I think that's just kind of assuming things and not really paying attention to the story when he makes that comment in this review. All right. And continuing on, Chris White writes, quote, "New gal." I like the play on words here. "New gal Gal Gadot makes an appealing, enigmatic Wonder Woman, if only because she's not forced to speak what should remain subtext the way everyone else is," unquote. So a couple questions. What does this even mean? What is he talking about here? Which Diana Prince lines did he actually have issues with? Which lines did he think should remain subtext? What other lines remain subtext in Batman v Superman? Sadly, I don't think I'm ever going to get answers to any of these questions because he doesn't mention any of that. He doesn't explain his thoughts. He doesn't go into any detail about why he thinks the way he thinks. So I don't know that we'll ever get answers to those questions. All right, so continuing on, quote, "Lawrence Fishburne, returning from 2013's Snyder-directed reboot, Man of Steel." Snyder-directed reboot. Man of Steel wasn't, I guess it was a reboot of a Superman film, but it wasn't a reboot of a Snyder film. That's, again, where is the editor on this review. Okay, I'm going to start over. Quote, Lawrence Fishburne, returning from 2013, Snyder-directed reboot Man of Steel, gives the film a badly needed jolt of levity in his handful of scenes as Daily Planet editor Perry White. Oh, I am so shocked. This is actually very refreshing that somebody would actually point out that there was humor in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, and was very specifically talking about Perry White.
Crime wave in Gotham. Other breaking news. Water. Wet.
I'm going to have to mark this down. This is just completely refreshing. We're probably not going to see that in many of these reviews, but this film critic actually mentions that there was humor in the film, and that he specifically points to Perry being a good bit of comedic relief. So good on you, Chris. Good on you, Chris from NPR. I appreciate that. So Chris goes on to say, quote, in BVS's sole inventive flourish, the chief complaint about its predecessor, Superman's failure to prevent a civilian body count in the thousands, is appropriated as Batman's motivation to take him down. The Battle of Metropolis is reprised from Bruce Wayne's point of view and psychologically linked to the murder of his parents back in 1981, unquote. So I like that in this paragraph, Chris makes a point to mention the chief complaint about Man of Steel, even though he snarked about BVS trying to correct that complaint at the very beginning of this review. But I appreciate that he proved my point for me. So thanks for that, Chris. And just so that he knows, Chris is correct that 1981, as far as I know, is the year in which the murder of the Waynes happens in the DCEU. This is going to come up again in this review, but I think it's a little unprofessional. And I know that why he's sort of writing it this way, but Chris is writing it almost as if he's talking to us. He's mentioning these things, and he's like, of his parents back in 1981. You don't have to put 1981. You can just write back in 1981. End of sentence. I think that's really unprofessional. I know he's probably trying to give this review a little personality here, as if he's communicating directly to us. But I personally would take this review a lot more seriously if he wasn't writing like that. Again, I would ask, where is the editor on this review? Okay, so Chris goes on to say, and quote, and at last we get the montage of Superman doing super deeds that Man of Steel denied us. He saves flood victims stranded atop their homes. He preserves the crew of an exploding rocket. He rescues a lady from a burning Mexico City high-rise. Instead of instantly blasting off to be I don't know how a lot of people would say this, but the Deus Ex Machina. I know a lot of people say that differently, Deus Ex Machina. In another out-of-frame drama, he hangs around long enough for the Mexican crowd, many in Day of the Dead regalia, to lay hands on him. This scene looks like a Renaissance painting, and it conveys Superman's crisis of faith over whether he can actually inspire noble acts more eloquently than any of the movie's many thudding conversations on the subject. These mostly involve Amy Adams' Lois Lane or Holly Hunter-Sen, somebody, parentheses, wait, dash, Finch, period, Senator Finch, period, parentheses. See, this is another example of this writing that he's doing, where he's writing as if he's writing it out and maybe this is a first draft. Maybe this was his first draft and he just turned it in, but he's writing it as if he's writing it like we're reading what he's writing as he's writing it. I don't know if that makes any sense to anyone else, but that's the way he's sort of this sort of technique that he's writing in. Again, I find it very unprofessional. He's making light of a lot of these things, trying to add a little like spunk to it. So, try to stand out from the crowd. But again, I would find it more professional, and I would take it much more seriously if he just wrote, these mostly involve Amy Adams' Lois Lane or Holly Hunter's Senator Finch, period. It's a weird choice. I know why he's probably doing it, but I still don't take it very seriously. But in terms of the actual content of the paragraph, I actually like this paragraph. Chris is actually making the attempt to dive into the Day of the Dead sequence and talking about what it looks like and what's happening there. and what he thinks it says to him about Superman. This is all good stuff. He's actually trying to, in this part of the review, actually engaging in what he saw in the film. And I actually don't even mind his critique about Lois Lane and Senator Finch's discussion about Superman as a hero here. If he wants to make that case, he can make it, although I don't actually think he does here, because he just mentions those things and doesn't follow up on it. So he really doesn't actually explain his point or makes a case for it. But why would he go and mention Senator Finch and then sort of make fun of how, I guess maybe he's trying to make the point that Senator Finch was forgettable and he couldn't remember it. But I don't think it's cute. I think it's actually unprofessional writing behavior. So continuing on, he writes, quote, maybe they tried to cast actors whose names sound like secret identities, unquote. One question, what? Well, what does that even mean? I don't even have a guess as to what he's trying to say here in this little sentence. So I just have one question. What? Continuing on, he writes, quote, but Henry Cavill has been turned into a clay-footed Man of Steel, scrubbed off the humility and warmth he brought to his first flight. You can't blame his Kal-El for feeling hot and cold toward our kind, considering that Metropolis has erected a tacky statue in his honor. At the same time, he is being summoned before a Senate panel to explain how he saved Lois from mercenaries in the African nation of Nairobi or something. Few films with verses in their title have ever been this hard to follow, unquote. So he starts off this paragraph seeming as if he's going to engage with the film, which I like. It's so rare in these reviews that somebody actually does that I'm excited when someone is going to attempt it. I really like that. But once he gets into the tacky statue and then gives up even trying to understand the African sequence and why it's in the film, that's really disappointing to me as a reader and as a film fan. Even in the theatrical version of the film, I would argue that you should be able to tie the African sequence to the Senate hearing testimony and then to how Lex Luthor is framing Superman by using Lois Lane. I think if Chris is able to calculate percentages and do math in this review, it seems like he should be able to connect the thread of all of these storylines and these scenes. I didn't find it that difficult, and I'm not very smart. I'm not able to do math like Chris is here. So if I can do it, I think anybody else can. So I really wish, as a reader, he would have, instead of saying that he didn't understand it, that he would try to engage in it. I think this is the disadvantage of critics only seeing these films once or having access to these films once, because maybe if he went back and rewatched it, he would start to piece things together. I know that was my experience with Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. The more I watched it, the more I picked up on all the things that it was trying to connect to each other, all the layers that were in the writing and in the visuals and in the performances that happened upon rewatch. So I think that's the sort of the disadvantage and the unfair approach to it that I think these reviewers don't seem to have. It's not the same experience as, say, a fan who goes to see it 15 times in the theater like me. Okay, continuing on, Chris writes, quote, still, I perked up when Superman walked into the Capitol because I desperately wanted to hear him say something homespun and ennobling. It's not an S. On my world, it means hope. It was a good line. But writers David Goyer and Chris Terrio never give him the chance. When it comes to what exactly superheroes are supposed to do, buck up on... this is a strange phrase. Buck up our own reserves of integrity and charity. They let Jesse Eisenberg's twitchy Lex Luthor do all the talking, unquote. Now, I understand wanting to hear Superman make his case to the Senate. I get that. The film gets him all the way to the podium, so you might expect him to say something. I think that's a fair read on the film and in the story and in that particular scene. But in my opinion, you also have to pay attention to what the film is actually doing here in this instance. Is this a scene that is supposed to feature a Superman hope speech? Is that what it's setting it up to do? Or is it actually written in a way to be used as a way for Lex Luthor to continue his goal of framing Superman and making him look bad, as well as getting rid of Senator Finch. You're going to be in the hot seat in there, Junebug, who was in his way. Senator Finch was in his way, and so Lex needed to get rid of her. And so this is the scene in which that happens, which was set up in a previous scene in the film. When Senator Finch goes to visit Lex in his office. So I don't think you can fault a film for not doing what you wanted it to do. Instead, I think as a reviewer, and this is how I approach things, is you have to look at what it actually does. So I think that this is a little bit of an unfair critique, even though I understand why he wants Superman to say something here, but I don't think that that's what the film was actually going for. And so I think you have to look at it as, what is the film actually doing here? And also, in addition to all of that, in looking at what the film is trying to accomplish with this scene, I made the case for this in my Christian imagery video on Batman v Superman, which you can watch here on this channel, youtube.com/duckmilkprod. The scene where Superman goes in front of the Senate hearing is very similar to Jesus going before Pontius Pilate in the Easter Passion story. So even if you wanted Superman to say something in this scene, the film Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice is very deliberately choosing not to have him speak, because it's paralleling the passion moments from the New Testament of the Bible for the Christ figure character of Superman. You see this all throughout the film with him as a Christ figure, and ultimately getting to the point where he dies and sacrifices himself to save humanity. And there's crosses around his death, and there's the moment of the Pietà. So there's a lot of that throughout the film. So if you have any interest in that, go check out my Christian imagery video, and hopefully that will make the case. So I think that the film is actually having him go up in front of the Senate like he's going up in front of Pontius Pilate, but choosing not to have him speak, because that's what happens with Jesus going up in front of Pontius Pilate. So I think you have to understand what the film is trying to accomplish in order to understand that sequence of events. Okay, continuing on, Chris writes, quote, "That's a major error, but not as bad as Warner Brothers' DC's corporate parent made when they decided they no longer have enough confidence in their flagship character to let this latest iteration of Superman carry another film or two before making him the Aaron Burr to Batman's Hamilton. They took away Superman's second chance, or maybe his second chance, after 2006 Mopey, but underappreciated Superman Returns. And worse, entrusted this film, and it's already announced 2 Justice League follow-ups to Snyder. He is to filmmaking what artists like Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane are to comics. Good at images, hopeless at storytelling. BVS is confusing before it gets boring, and boring before it gets bruising. But it hits all the dreary stations of the superhero cross eventually. Is it an accident? The movie, originally slated for last summer, is coming out on Good Friday," unquote. BVS is a continuation of Man of Steel, and it's a perfect continuation of what happened in that film. And so complaining about the storyline not being what you want it to be is not a critique of BVS. I sort of laughed at the mopey but underappreciated Superman Returns. I would love to know why he thinks that. I would maybe, I can see that argument. I think there's some good parts of Superman Returns. It definitely is mopey in parts, but I don't think that makes it bad. I think there are other elements of the film that make it somewhat less desirable, in my opinion. But, I appreciate giving a fair run to Superman Returns, but he doesn't say why that is. Why do you think Superman Returns is mopey but underappreciated? If you're going to make the point to include it in this review when Superman Returns really has nothing to do with Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, it's a completely different, take on the universe, played with different actors as the characters. So I don't understand why it's in this review about Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, other than the fact that these 2 films have Superman in them. That's the only connection to them. So if you're going to at least mention it in the review, explain why it's mopey but underappreciated. I would at least like to know that if you're going to mention it. And then this critic is also making the old style over substance argument when it comes to Zack Snyder, but he neither really engages in either the style or the substance of this film. He sort of mentions the Renaissance painting and kind of gets in there about some of the storyline, but it's so limited in this review. So I don't know that you can make the case that he's just style over substance when you don't actually engage in the substance or the style. So I think that's a disappointing part of the review. So I also think, a critic who thinks even the BVS theatrical cut is confusing. I guess I'd already mentioned this about how I think that this is, or if they think that it's confusing, maybe they should have another go at the film. I really wish they could give them access to it more than once. And also, I just want to know what's confusing about it. The story of BVS is not that complicated. There's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot going on, but when you boil it down, it's not hard to understand. Bruce Wayne and some of the human population of Earth see Superman as a cause of destruction and death. That's pretty easy to understand. He's a superhuman being who shoots fire from his eyes. People can be scared of that. I get it. The film digs into why that may or may not be correct. There's a lot of discussion on whether or not Superman is a force for good or a force of evil. Lex Luthor also has a bone to pick with Superman and does everything he can to make him look bad. I don't understand why any of that is so difficult to understand about this. There's a lot of mention in this review about how this is a complicated film that makes no sense, and I just don't understand what's hard to understand about it. Although in this section of the review, Chris does seem to understand the Christian imagery in the film enough to point out that its release during Easter is something to make note of, but either he doesn't care to, or he's not intelligent enough about the subject to dig into that aspect of the film. Maybe if he did a little bit, he would find that some of the things he complained about in this review were maybe intentional. So sorry, that's one of those reasons why I wish that some of these reviewers would just keep digging, keep getting into it, maybe push a little harder and see if you can find something else. All right, so Chris goes on to say, quote, as with last year's Marvel Bonanza, Adventures Age of Ultron, that's an interesting way to put that, Marvel Bonanza, Avengers Age of Ultron, there's an out-of-nowhere dream or prophecy interlude that we can only infer will be explained in some other flick a year or three from now, unquote. So I guess Chris does have an issue with some of that teasing of the films in the MCU, just like he's complaining about it with Batman v Superman. So I guess that's fair. I have that same critique, Chris, so I'm going to agree with you on that. And so I appreciate those thoughts. I think a film should be a standalone film and should only contain things in the story of that film. I actually kind of don't like post-credit teases and things like that. It kind of makes it less of a film. So I agree with you on that, Chris. All right, so he continues on to say, quote, in BVS, that wacko hallucination is more intriguing than the film it interrupts, unquote. And I would agree with you, Chris. I think that the nightmare sequence is intriguing. I would not agree to you that it's more intriguing than the film that it interrupts, but at least I appreciate that you liked the nightmare sequence. That's good. I think that's great. I think if only maybe they would further explore that in continuing films. Wouldn't that be nice? Hashtag restore the Snyderverse. So he continues on to say, quote, even the things the widely reviled Man of Steel did right, Hans Zimmer's stirring score, Alex McDowell's otherworldly production design, Cavill's warm smile in the last shot of the movie, all are buried here, unquote. Maybe I'm just throwing this out there. Maybe because it's a different film. Maybe because the story is different. Maybe because the journey of Superman is different. Just ask good questions. Okay, and he also writes, quote, and Wonder Woman's feats of strength against a generic computer-generated monster in the third act aren't nearly compensation enough for the sad fact that both of the women in Cal's life, Lois and his adopted ma, Martha Kent, played by Diane Lane, get used as super bait and pushed around, unquote. What's with these film critics having a big issue with including a monster in the film? What is that about? What is that about? That seems to come up a lot in these reviews, and I don't understand. Well, I just don't understand why having a monster in the film is a bad thing. Why do they act like that is a critique of the film? Just because a monster is in there, why is that bad? I don't understand that critique. I don't even think it's a critique. It's just describing what happened in the film. I don't get it. So just to point out something that is another indication that I think maybe an editor should have gone through this review with a fine-tooth comb. I have this review in my Google Docs. I operate solely out of Google Docs. I love Google Docs. When I have this review sort of copy and pasted into Google Docs wants me to change Chris's sentence to write enough compensation instead of compensation enough. So maybe you could do it both ways, but Google Docs is like, nope, switch them around, switch those words around. So I'm just pointing that out because I think that's an interesting bit there, that he would choose to put those words in that order. So, and then to continue on, I think a film critic complaining that the people closest to Superman getting used by the villain, I don't know if that's a legitimate critique. If it was, you'd have to make that case for just about every Superman story that has ever been written. That happens all the time. And not just Superman comics or Superman films or TV shows. That happens in almost every superhero story. How many times has, Mary Jane been kidnapped in a Spider-Man story? How many times has she been at risk or in danger? Why is that a critique? That's just a superhero trope that is used by almost every storyteller in every genre and every comic book character in both in Marvel and DC. I don't see why that's a critique. Martha Kent may have taken more of the heat here in terms of not being able to fight back during her kidnapping because she is tied up and she is being threatened to be burned alive. But this is because her rescue by Batman gives a good catharsis here for his character to be able to save a Martha and allows the audience to see a change in this Batman. He goes from a very vengeful Batman who may or may not kill. The arguments could go back both ways. But he becomes a Batman you don't recognize at the beginning of the film. Maybe some people had problems with the portrayal of Batman at the beginning of BVS. But the Martha rescue gives us a really good look at what Batman should be and what Batman maybe was in his, Ben Affleck's Batman maybe was in his earlier part of his career. And so yes, maybe Martha could have had opportunities to maybe fight back, but I think this also gives her a chance to give catharsis to somebody else's son. And I think that's actually really beautiful. And so I don't have any problems with Martha being kidnapped or threatened because I think it does something beautiful for both of the characters of Bruce Wayne and for Martha Kent. Lois Lane, though, she might get physically pushed around by, actually being pushed off of a skyscraper by Lex Luthor. But in the end, she has all the evidence she needs on him. And guess what? He winds up in jail. How does that happen? I don't know. Maybe because Lois Lane has all the evidence that she needs to make a case against him. So Lois Lane is one of the best parts of Batman v Superman. She has such a strong storyline in the film, and she's very active in it. And she actually saves Superman several times. So I don't think that the critique is fair here. Maybe you could make that same critique that Chris does about Martha, but I don't think you can make it about Lois. All right, and so the big finale, the big finish here in this review. Quote, once upon a time, Margot Kidder's Lois contrived to prove Clark Kent was really Superman by throwing herself off of a building. Okay, it was Niagara Falls, but my point stands, unquote. Whew, that is such a weak, I'm just going to be honest, that's a weak ending for a review. Usually they say to, tell people what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. That's a pretty standard way to write any kind of editorial or any kind of essay. But here he just kind of like the whole review is really wordy and he has a lot to say. And then here at the end, it just peters out. It just fades away. It's a weak ending. I'm sorry, Chris. I have to say it. It's a weak ending. You really could have maybe brought it back home to what you thought about the film and really kind of concluded it all for us. So I find that the ending of this review to be a little perplexing myself. Okay, so let's talk about this Margot Kidder, Lois Lane, Superman 2 situation. So in Superman 2, Margot Kidder, if you remember, if you've seen it, if you hadn't, I'll kind of describe it for you. Margot Kidder's Lois Lane. She jumps into Niagara Falls because she's trying to get Clark to out himself as Superman. She has suspicions that he is Superman, and she's going to prove it because she thinks if she jumps in there, he's going to have to turn into Superman and save her. Well, Amy Adams' Lois Lane doesn't need to do any of that because she figured out his secret in one film, in Man of Steel. And she actually did all of the investigation she needed to track him down, an alien, mind you, track him down through all the people in his past, all these people he's worked with, all these people he got to know. She interviewed all these people, got to know them, and ended up at his mother's front door in a small town in Kansas. I don't know about anybody else, but I would rather a Lois Lane do that and actually be an investigative reporter instead of just foolishly jumping into Niagara Falls. And also, while we're at it, talking about this scene from Superman 2, I continue to think Clark Kent is a huge jerk. I know people love Christopher Reeve. There's elements of his Superman that I really like too. His Superman and his Clark Kent. But here in this instance, I think it's a really jerky move that he lets Lois... He sees her jump into the water. He sees her go down this big river for a long time. She's in the water for a very long time, almost drowning. And he lets her almost drown, putting herself in danger just so he can keep lying to her. I don't know. Maybe other people don't have an issue with that, but I think it's a real jerk move. I think he should have, he eventually helps her by heat visioning a tree limb so that she can grab onto it and he can pull her out as Clark Kent. But man, what a jerk move. Can you imagine if Henry Cavill's Superman let Lois Lane jump into a river and sail down a river almost drowning for I don't know, minutes? I can't even imagine what Twitter would do about that. But people seem to be okay with it when Christopher Reeve's Clark Kent does it. But I just think this is a weird ending to the review. It just kind of peters out, and it basically says that Margot Kidder's Lois Lane is empowering because she throws herself off of the building. Nobody else pushes her off the building. She throws herself off, so that's why she's empowering. Okay, Chris. Yeah. So I think there's some good elements to this review, but I also have a lot of problems with these critiques. I think a lot of this could have maybe been written better, maybe more explained. That's an element of these reviews that I still continue to have issues with because I think if you're going to make these claims or make an argument for these things, you need to show me your work. Tell me why you think the way you do. But I just, I wish that, we've gone through this whole review. It's pretty lengthy, actually. And to go to the end and it just kind of falls off, just like, Margot Kidder throwing herself into Niagara Falls. I just wish, there was maybe a little bit of a reward by the end of this review. You get through it all the way to the end and maybe you get a reward as a reader. But here, I don't think you do. I think it just kind of gives up at the end. So I think that's a little bit unfortunate. Well, I think that's maybe going to do it for this review and analysis of the top critics of Rotten Tomatoes, specifically this one from Chris Klimek or Chris Klimek of NPR. If you missed this live, I hope you'll consider sharing your thoughts in the comment section below. What did you think about this review and what were your thoughts and some of the points that he makes in it? On a scheduling note, I will be taking next Sunday off due to the July 4th weekend. So I will not be doing a live stream during July 4th weekend. And if you have any questions about when I'll be live, just check this YouTube channel, youtube.com/duckmilkprod. I'll be scheduling the live streams in advance. So when I'm available on the Sundays when I am able to do it, you'll see it on the channel and you can just get reminders so it will remind you. But I'll try to be really consistent about these, but just because it is a holiday next weekend, I won't be doing it for the July 4th holiday. All right. Well, that's going to do it for me and this review of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. So I'm going to let voiceover Rebecca take it away and wrap up this live stream. If you would like to see more of these live streams, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel at youtube.com/duckmilkprod. If you'd like to keep in touch with me personally, you can follow me on Instagram at @TheDerbyKid and on Vero @DerbyKid. You can hear my thoughts on the CW Supergirl TV series and all things Kara Zor-El over at Supergirl Radio by visiting supergirlradio.com, subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts, or subscribing to the DC TV Podcast YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/DCTVPodcasts. Also, please check out the Justice League Universe podcast for in-depth analysis on the DCEU films, including Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And before I go, I hope that this live stream video series will inspire you to think more critically and thoughtfully about film and storytelling. I'd like to leave you with this quote from C.S. Lewis's book titled An Experiment in Criticism. "The truth is not that we need the critics in order to enjoy the authors, but that we need the authors to enjoy the critics." My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life.